Thank you very much. I always love having a septic class after dinner or lunch. Yeah, I don't know about that, actually. We'll see. Good evening, and thanks for having me. This is my second time here. I was here, I don't know, 5 years ago. Memories get a little foggy as a hair gets a little bit more gray. My name is Tim Shotzberger. I'm the owner of Homeland Environmental and also Homeland Labs that does water, wastewater, and mold analysis. Homeland Environmental does environmental testing, and we don't do structural inspections, but well, septic, sewer, radon, and mold. I'm also the current president of the Greater Baltimore Board of Realtors, so I kind of come from that perspective too. They let me get my license and kind of go up through the chain there. So
explains the gray hair.
Yeah, having to deal with realtors on another level, not just at the job site. You guys don't know yet; you're new, but realtors are very difficult to deal with. But we do. This class, this PowerPoint that I'm about to kind of show you guys is meant for realtors. It's kind of what we put together for. I go a lot faster through the technical stuff with you guys. But I love kind of having like more of a town hall atmosphere. So as I'm going through this presentation, please throw up your hand. It's probably going to put me in a tangent, which I like. Sometimes you might be one step ahead of me, which I tell you to wait on that. But I'd much rather have this conversation be about you guys and what you're curious about. Right now, I'm just kind of taking a guess what that is. So, any questions? All right, good. The first thing I want to explain is it's just kind of basics, because I know there's a couple people in the room, maybe more, that just really have no idea what a septic system is, and then we're kind of jump into the other stuff. I always use the example, there's a house behind me, and there's one pipe leaving that house. And instead of that pipe going to a sewer system, it's going to a septic tank. And after the septic tank, the water then flows to a distribution box, which is little, maybe 3 foot by 3 foot box on the ground. And then after that, that box distributes the water to, say, 2, 3, 4 drain fields, or 2 dry wells, or a sand mound system, or what we call an absorption system. And that's really the risk for most home buyers or most homeowners, is how long is this absorption system going to last, because the prices are pretty darn high and they're not getting any cheaper. That's good job security for us. But again, I just want to understand the basic components. As I talk about septic system, I'm talking about kind of the generic, 85% or 90% of the systems out there. There's always that 10%, which is crazy different stuff. I just touch on that a little bit, but if you want more of that, you're going to have to invite me back. And I doubt you're going to do that very quickly. I talk about the septic tank, right? You have the house, and then all that water goes to the septic tank. And I forgot to pass it out. In this pamphlet, you're going to see a profile view of a septic tank, something like this. Right, so we're underground looking inside this tank, and in this picture, the house will be over here. All the sewage is coming in this tank, and there's really one job of the septic tank is to trap solids, right? We don't want the solids going out to this absorption system where it's going to clog it up. We have to spend money sooner. We want the tank to trap solids and then let the cleaner water to this absorption system. And it's pretty simple the way it works. All this water comes in the tank. So does all the solids, right? Hair from the sink, humid waste from the toilet, paint, whatever you can put in there, we should put some of this stuff down. But all this stuff's going to come in the tank, the grease and the toilet paper, that stuff floats to the top. We call that the scum layer. Everything else kind of falls to the bottom. We call that the sludge layer. But the point is, in the middle, it just creates this cleaner water zone, right? I can't say clean, it's not clean, but it's usually clear enough where you can see through it. So there's much less solids in the middle. Those solids are either on the top or the bottom. And over time, we call this a septic tank because there's septic bacteria in here, and the septic bacteria is swimming around and eating solids, right? Eating that sludge level, it's eating the scum layer, and it's kind of keeping the solids kind of minimal until they just accumulate to a point where we do need to get it pumped out by a pump truck, and generally that might be, I don't know, every 2 to 5 years. It really depends on the household, the chemistry, and many, many other things. But if there wasn't this septic bacteria in the tank, this sludge and the scum levels would fill up to a point that they would overflow in the matter of, I'd probably tell you 6 weeks, a few months. This bacteria is vital for a septic system because we don't have that healthy bacteria in there. It's not digesting the solids, and it's just going to fill up the solids much quicker. And that's when you hear kind of the, the gossip, don't put bleach down your drain, and you should put sour milk down your drain because that does create bacteria. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I would probably be careful about what goes down, but this day and age, 2023, there's not a whole lot of people that have great chemistry in the house. When I say chemistry, I mean septic chemistry. We're not supposed to be putting some of this stuff down the drain, but we do today, and these systems are kind of built bigger to handle that, if that makes sense. So we can be a little bit more lenient than we were 20 years ago. Please.
So how about the, what is it, Red X or something that, is trying to sell you to put down and keep your septic tank healthy? Is that detrimental, good, bad?
It can be detrimental at times if they overuse it, because Red X is a solid, and if they overuse it, the bacteria actually doesn't eat them itself. Very rare we ever saw that. I tell you this, we do sell an additive. I mean, I haven't sold it in years, I bet, but we offer an additive if anybody ever asks. And it has a bacteria count of like 40 million bacteria per liter or some stat I can't remember. And it's the highest bacteria count it could find. So people that have are on chemotherapy, people that have to put in some really bad stuff in their septic system, I do think that the bacteria additives, if they're healthy ones, can be a good product. A normal homeowner, I don't really think you need it, to be honest with you. And Rich, I would tell you, compared to other products that I've researched over the years, I've been in this business way too long, Ridix doesn't have a very high bacteria count. So I would just steer, whatever you see on the shelf at Home Depot is probably more geared towards making profit than saying a high bacteria count. So be wary. I won't say they're all negative, but it's not like we suggest it to very many people. There's a job of, my light isn't working so well. The job of this front baffle, I show you right here, right? If you remember the house is over here and all the water comes in, this front baffle's job is to just make sure that the flow of the water doesn't come in and splash and settle like over here, 40% in the tank or 50% in the tank. We want that water to hit the baffle and drop down. The reason we want that is we want a long retention time. We want it to take a long time for that water to get pushed to get back in the tank where it goes up this baffle and out. The longer we have water in this tank, I know Pennsylvania can say water, the longer we have water in this tank, the more contact time there is with the bacteria, the more productive the tank's going to be. If you don't have a front baffle and the house is way up on a hill and it's coming down real fast, instead of having a 7-day retention time, this tank maybe you have a 2 or 3 day retention time. It might not be enough for the bacteria to do its job, and that system's going to have a problem sooner than other systems, right? I'm not failing the system because of that necessarily, but it's something to know as a homeowner. There is an importance to it. The back baffle is the most important part of the system, the whole entire system, not just the tank. The big back baffle is what traps the scum layer, right? That toilet paper and grease I was telling you, how it flows to the top. If this baffle was not here, the scum could go right on out to the absorption system. But with this pipe here, the water goes up the middle and then out. If that makes sense. So we're trapping the solids. This pipe goes down 18 inches, which is about halfway the tank. If we put it down too far, it would be grabbing sludge. So we like that, the bottom of the baffle to be right in the middle of the tank to get the most efficient effluent. Yeah. Yes. Is it a joke? Oh, no, I can go back. Okay, 2-chamber tanks, is that going to be your question? So in Anne Arundel County, they probably started putting in 2-chamber tanks in the late 80s. Baltimore County, maybe the late 90s. Nowadays, we see more and more and more and more of them. They're a little bit bigger, usually about 1,500 gallons, where the last tank I showed you is probably 1,000 or 1,250. And again, every county is different. 2-chamber tank, so a little bit bigger. The really main thing is you have an extra back baffle. You don't need a front baffle here. Why? Because we're really not worried about the speed of the flow over here. Front baffle is not important. It's a back baffle that's important here. And as you see, some solids are still going to escape out here over time. Here's a second outlet baffle to make sure that we're not going to the drain field. One thing, we've had a tough year and a half, right, us inspectors. One thing we've started to do internally is try to sell outlet filters to homeowners. And it's a filter that can go in the outlet baffle. It fits right in the PVC. And any solids that want to get, up through this baffle actually get stuck again on that third filter in this case, or second filter for just a single chamber tank. These filters have to be cleaned about every year or so. So then there's an operation and maintenance side to it where we get to charge them $125 and come back here a year to clean it. And then we're coaching them on their tank pump mix and so forth. But some counties require these. Washington County's been requiring outlet filters for a long time now on new systems. They don't always give you great access. I had an employee complain to me today that he had to go down 7 feet to pull up one of these baffles because there was 5 feet of riser and had like another 2 feet down here, for example. So access is important, If we do install an outlet filter, we being my company, we always put a riser above it because we don't want to put that homeowner in a situation the filter's going to clog and then maybe they don't like us and they can't go to anybody else and they're really stuck. So we want to make it easy for the homeowner to do themselves or to pass along to another company. It's not something to maintain or climb. So.
Question. Just looking at physics, if the liquid coming in is not great enough, that would lower the scum level. And does that increase the chance that the scum comes up and throws?
If there's less, say, toilet paper grease coming to the tank.
Or less liquid. If I'm looking at the liquid layer there,
yeah,
if it's less, then the scum layer comes down.
Usually, yeah. Usually it's a situation where the scum and the sludge builds together at the same time, but depends on the chemistry in your home, right? If you say you have 3 teenage daughters, you're probably going to be using a lot more toilet paper than if you had 2 people. Toilet paper rises, you might have more scum level than sludge. In most cases, I would tell you the sludge builds a lot quicker. We do, we learn a lot when you look in somebody's septic system about the chemistry. We do see that, the people that cook with a lot of grease. I mean, you can tell when you go in, you can see the coloration, right? The whites and the purples and the oranges and stuff like that. And next to the kind of stat that I'll get to in a second, the stat that we get told when we go for classes is that when the solids accumulate to 30% of the height, right? If it's 4 feet tall and now we have a foot and a third of solids by adding up the sludge and the scum, that's when it should get pumped out. So there's actually a formula that we can go back to for guidance.
One of the things that we tell our clients that are going to be in the house with septic system is that it's not necessarily the chemicals that go down the drain, it's the laundry itself. Because when septic systems were first put in, people were wearing natural fibers. And now it's all the synthetics and the microfleece and the little itty bitty microplastics that can make it past all the backfolds and get into the leach.
Not get broken down. The top would continue to get broken down.
That'll kill the septic system pretty fast.
I haven't noticed that problem so much specifically, not to say it's not a problem, but I would tell you with laundry, what we do is when we put in 50 gallons of water in the tank at one time, we call it kind of flushing out the bacteria. So right, we're talking Saturday mornings now, we're doing 3 loads of laundry back to back to back. We just pushed all this clean water through us, right? It's not really dirtier than kind of what you were describing in phosphorus. But we kind of pushed all that clean water right out, and with that clean water leaving, so did the bacteria in the tank. And we kind of take the bacteria out. Now, if you have plenty of sludge, that will build up over time. But we do see these houses that are used to kind of going to these weekend surges, and it kind of can mess up the chemistry in the tank. I'm not here to scare anybody. Like these instances I talk about are pretty few and far between, but these instances are out there, and then they look for these septic experts to try to figure out what's going on, and these are the answers they come up with. The material is usually concrete. We do find some plastic. If we find metal, we have to fail it. And MD says that it's no good. We've been doing that for years, and I don't find too many metal tanks anymore. 1973 is where I would say the cutoff was. We see a couple of tanks installed that were metal after 73 that were thicker in the early 80s, and then Monroe County was not many. So they're usually just deteriorated by corrosive gases within the septic tank itself. Right, I think bacteria, as it's eating the solids, there's a gas byproduct, and that lingers in that upper 8 inches of aerospace in the tank. So all the corrosivity in the tank is always right before, is above the water level right here. We're not going to look down here and see a bunch of corrosivity because the water's kind of protecting it. All the gases rise to the top. So that's what's exposed, and it'll show deterioration of concrete. Cinder block is not a good tank. Maryland Department of Environment, our regulators say that it can't be watertight. Comar, our Bible, right, Comar says that septic tanks have to be watertight. Just a picture of one. I will mention this quickly, and then I won't talk too much about this technical stuff, but what we see here is a top seam tank. And if you can imagine a boom truck, a flatbed truck with a crane on, arriving on the property to put this tank in the ground, that the excavator dug a big hole. In this top seam tank, he lowers a big box in the ground, he or she, and then puts tar around the top and then puts a lid on top of that. The great part about that is if it happens to leak, in other words, if they didn't do a very good job with the tar, well, the seam's up here, so no water's going to leak out of that because the seam is above the water level. So if they didn't do that install right, which is basically sealing the lid to the tank itself, You could have some groundwater intrusion come in that tank in high water capable areas, eastern shore, but we don't have to worry about the water in the tank leaking out. However, up until around the year 2004, 2005, every tank that was installed was a mid-seam tank. And these tanks, when they're delivered on a boom truck, is delivered, we put half the tank in, we seal the car, and then you put the top half in, and that seals in the middle. So if somebody didn't do a very good job with that seal, that tarp seal, that tank has been leaking since the day it was installed. Not a big deal environmentally. It's not going to hurt the septic system because water's going in the ground here, the tank versus out here in the absorption system. But COMAR says that has to be watertight, and MDE enforces that. So we kind of have to play by the regulations. And even though we think we're making people spend, that isn't all that necessary. It's a business. I'm sure you guys can probably be sensitive to that.
Is it because solids are not necessarily escaping through that crack in the tank, so it's not really? Is that why it's not as much of an environmental issue?
You might have some solids escape out. What happens with the septic system is this water, after it gets cleaned, gets absorbed. And right, there could be an argument that the tank itself if there's a big gaping hole in that tank that some solids are going out, but over time that's just going to clog that little bit of soil around it. Again, this is kind of this argument that you can talk with environmental guys all over Maryland, and some guys are like, even the environmental people are like, no, you don't have to worry about a leaking tank. And other guys are like, yes, you do have to worry about a leaking tank.
And then the scale is how many of them.
There is a lot, believe it or not. We've been doing this 19 years. We've done over 25,000 septic inspections, so we got a big end value there. And we thought a lot of tanks. A lot of the reason is because when the counties allowed these tanks to be installed, right, the sanitarians in that county supposed to be doing the inspection. They didn't care if the tank leaked or not. So they really didn't make sure the tar was done right, and there's been a lot of leaking tanks over the years. And a lot of septic contractors have been making money off that. Again, we feel like we're bad guys because we spot them, we fail them, but it's just kind of the rules we have to play by. That's the other hand.
Yes. Okay. Why anyone would do this, I don't know. But can those split tanks be repaired?
Yes.
Hydraulic cement or something that way?
They call them parging the tank, where you kind of paint that concrete again inside. I would tell you it's a good Band-Aid. Again, as an inspector, right? We don't care how you fix it. If you fix it for a couple of days, if I come back and inspect it, it works. I know it's going to deteriorate because it's just, parging. But I've seen guys do it. And at first I used to be like, no, it's not good because it's a Band-Aid, but that's not for me to say. As long as the buyer and the seller have that information, I'm fine with it. Again, the concept is instead of the water being leached in the ground out here where the drainage strips of drywall are, it's happening here. In my opinion, it's really only an issue in these high water table areas like the Eastern Shore. And there, we don't care about the water leaking out of the tank. We care about all that groundwater leaking in the tank, flowing out to the drain and just filling it all. And that's a big issue. Up here in the Piedmont, we call this geographic region of the Piedmont. I don't think it's an issue, in my opinion only though, which doesn't matter a whole lot. So if you get me all fired up. Cinder block tank, another reason that they're failures, and we, again, I have my own opinion. Cinder block tanks are almost always leaking. And a cinder block tank, other than the difference is it's not a concrete manufacturer putting it on a boom truck that's precast concrete. It's somebody that would actually make the tank on site with concrete, and then they parge it. They basically paint it with concrete. And again, it works great for a number of years, but as you see, that parging just wears away, and then deterioration happens and there's leakage. I'm more worried about the cinder block tanks collapsing than I am them leaking water in the ground. Collapsing, that's a big liability, So, we always failed cinder block tanks before we got that guy. But and just so you guys understand, this is a top-down view of these, but you see the back baffles of all three of them, right?
Those back baffles are open on the top?
Open on the top here because you need that airflow. When water goes out of the tank into the distribution box, air is coming back out, right. And you need to go up. Every now and again, we see a sweep here where there's no opening on the top, and you can get that, what do they call that, hydraulic pressure, and the water won't travel anymore because the air pressure is pushing it back. Doesn't happen a lot, but we do. And then what people do is they basically kind of drill like a 3-inch hole in the baffle, and then they should just replace with a team. Again, I feel old now. I've been doing this 19 years. I never used to say that before COVID. I always felt young. But what I used to see people do 10 years ago, okay, nowadays everything seems to be much more formal. Permits seems to get for everything. People are more professional, I think. There's just a higher level of standards. So a lot of what I speak to is kind of in the past. Keep in mind, I've been out of the field now for probably 6 or 7 years. So a lot of this, what I'm telling you, I might be losing a little bit of my my information from the field knowledge perspective. And that's why I'm going to kind of pass on this stuff real quick so we can talk about the fun stuff. Yeah, the fun stuff. Maryland BAT law, best available technology. So this relates to these nitrate reducing septic tanks, which we're seeing more and more and more. And in Frederick County, you guys are having a lot of headaches with the health department there. The realtor association's hiring a lawyer to kind of deal with that. There's a new employee that there named Barry Glad, thought he used to work for MBE, the state regulators. He moved to Frederick County and he made everything by the book. Well, the person that was in that position before Barry did not have everything by the book, so you have this kind of swift change of perception, and it's really upsetting some people. But he's by the book, you know, I can't argue with them. These BAT tanks, there's a long history. And again, I try not to bore you, but it started way back with Governor Ehrlich. He was the first one to come up with this kind of Bay Fund money, where money comes out of our property taxes, gets put in this Bay Restoration Fund, and money goes towards sewer replacements, septic repair, farmland, and stormwater runoff. Some of the money goes to septic, which is kind of what we're focusing on here today. When Ehrlich initiated, it was just totally volunteer. And I want to say it was like the mid 2014, 2016, if memory serves right. And I was telling everybody, get this tank, it's free, you know, it's just an experimental thing, but they're going to be around. Nobody really bid on it. So when Governor O'Malley came in after Ehrlich, he said, hey, nobody's getting these BAT tanks. No more making it voluntary, you got to get it. Every builder, every new home has to get it, every repair had to get it. That lasted for a couple years and it got nixed. And it got pushed back to what we kind of see today, very close to what we see today, which is homes within what we call, I think I was on it, the critical area, which is within 1,000 feet of tidal water. Okay, so not much of a big deal around here, right? We don't have much tidal water. South of DC, the Potomac is tidal. North of DC, it's not. Chesapeake Bay is tidal. So Anne Arundel County hugely affected by this. 1,000 feet is a pretty big area, believe it or not, you know, when you look at a map. So they have to put them in, and the goal is to reduce the nitrate input that septic systems are putting into them. And that works, I'll say that. I just want to go into mechanics because you guys are have inspectors and mechanical inclined, so I want to go over that real quick. The tank I showed you before, is it still in your head? Right, we got a picture of that. This is very different. This is a mechanical tank. When I say that it's a BAT septic tank, my regulators at the state and the county are like, oh, don't call it a septic tank. It's not a septic tank because it's no longer using septic bacteria. Right? The goal of this tank is to no longer use that old septic bacteria that swims around. We want a monstrous bacteria that can digest a whole lot more solids and therefore decrease the nitrates. The way it works, you kind of have 3 chambers, and I should preface this by saying there's about 12 different manufacturers out there that have BAT certified technologies in Maryland. They're engineering companies. And with each of those 12 manufacturers, you might have 2 units per manufacturer. One might be for a 3-bedroom, one for a 5, or maybe there's a commercial unit, but you get it. There's many different units. They all kind of have the same concept though. They're all pretty similar, but this doesn't reflect a single one of them, if that makes sense. All right, good. So we have this first chamber here, which we call the trash tank now, right? It's very small. This may be 200 gallons of capacity. And as we know, there's not a whole lot of retention time. That water is going to go in and out. Bacteria is not going to eat it up. What's the point of that? Well, the point is to kind of, we call it a trash tank. We wanted to collect the big stuff. And I'm not going to get graphic because we just ate dinner. But we want, you know, kind of dirty water to pass through, but we don't want it to be too heavy, right? But we know bacteria is going to do much. There's no retention time, blah, blah, blah. It gets into the second chamber. The second chamber is where we start introducing oxygen. So there's a blower in almost every one of these. I think everyone. Sometimes it sits right on top of the tank. Sometimes it's hidden closer to the house. But that blower, for the most part, 24/7 is blowing oxygen or air in this tank, and it's blowing up through here. So just making contact all the way up. So this
Excuse
new.
me.
Yep.
So Larry from Florida is asking for you to repeat what BAT means.
Best available technology. It's an acronym Maryland likes to use because this technology is forever changing. And they're looking far enough ahead to know that, hey, we're looking at nitrates as a problem today, but 15 years from now, it could be coating that we're trying to fix, for example. I know that the Bay has one. So that's why the BAT, so it really leaves it open for expansion in the future.
So these are aerobic tanks, whereas the
Correct.
traditional septic tank is anaerobic?
Correct, thank you. I was just going to get into that. In Florida, they call these ATUs, BAT is kind of a Maryland specific term. You stole my phone. Septic bacteria is anaerobic. When I do this in front of realtors, and this is going to be aerobic bacteria, right? Because we're introducing oxygen. Boom. We got oxygen. Well, this bacteria loves to eat just like septic bacteria. So we got the food here, we got the oxygen. It's a little bit more high maintenance, this bacteria, this aerobic bacteria. It doesn't like to swim around. It needs to sit and hold somewhere. So these tanks, when they first started doing it, they just weren't getting the reaction because there wasn't enough of the bacteria. There wasn't a enough count of bacteria because there's not enough surface area in that tank for them to live in. So the next step is we got to develop some type of media we can throw in this middle chamber to let the bacteria have a home. And that media in some of these is ground up wiffle balls. Others it's sponges. Something that just has a whole lot of surface area just for something to land and live on.
They have to look at the aquarium tray.
Yeah.
This has been part and parcel of aquarium filtration for 30 years, but it's become like much more refined science more recently.
And it could be because there's a lot of money in this. I'm sure there's money in aquariums too, but it's the same
Expanded
science.
ceramics is the accepted standard for the most surface area.
What is?
Expanded ceramics.
So I bet you some of these manufacturers, keep in mind some are more expensive than others, right? And they know how much bacteria they need. I don't want to, the science, as you dig into this, it is vast, right? You get engineers that are doing all these studies that are way beyond me. The good news is the product of this, the end result, as this water comes out, it looks like a bottle of aqua. Now it still has pathogens, it still has viruses and bacteria. It's not healthy. However, the nitrate level, for example, is about, in most of these units, about maybe 17 to 20 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. Nitrates, I should say, not nitrogen. If you guys do water sampling, you know that the state, actually the EPA requirement is 10 milligrams per liter. If it's above 10, we say, hey, that could be some health issues if you drink it. If it's below 10, it's safe for human consumption. We're putting affluent, human waste out at about 17 to 19. So it does work. The amount of septic nitrogen contribution to the bay, I forget the stats because it's been a while since I've had my head in the book, but I want to say it's like 7%. Farmland's like 50%. So all the money we're spending on these BAT tanks, yes, it's working. How much is it going to really solve? I don't know. It is best to have them in a critical area. I'd much rather see them there than in the middle of Frederick County, for example, where they don't have direct contact with tidal water. And the reason that if it's not tidal, it doesn't necessarily need this is because when water moves around, it denitrifies, right? It's just kind of aeration effect where the nitrogen just kind of releases into the air because it's just moving and regurgitating. So there's a denitrification effect when moving waters.
Is there a vet in there?
Say that one more time?
Is there some sort of vet in that?
Usually not. I haven't seen too many of them. Usually where you see a vent could be like a long run from the septic tank to the distribution box, especially if there's a pump. Again, you got to release that air that you're pushing out. But I would tell you that the people that install them usually maintain them. So you're going to see like 4 or 5 manhole risers sticking up out of the ground because they don't want to dig when they go back next year, right? But they could put in a vent too. It's usually in a more unusual circumstance.
So how do you, if you go to a house that has a septic system, how do you recognize if it is a conventional system or if it's a bat tank?
Very, very difficult. Even our inspectors, it can be difficult sometimes until you look at them and open them up. And we find out in most cases from county records. So usually, not always, but we usually have records before we go to their property. So we kind of have a warning ahead of time. Or a homeowner tells us through our homeowner interview that we ask them. But the realtors ask me that question. I'm like, good luck, realtor. You have so many things to kind of understand. If you want to try to guess which one's a DT, which one's not, very difficult. I will tell you the control panel is an indicator. It could just be for a standard pump, but if that has the name Hoot or Norweco or some of these manufacturers, they should be tagging themselves because if there's something wrong with that system, there should be a number. I believe it's actually in the regs that should be on that. So that's how we would know on site is we just know who the manufacturers are.
So just because a septic system has power running to it doesn't mean it's that system.
Just because it's fan blowing doesn't mean.
It could just be an area. In Hartford County, they were putting in those fans in like the late 70s as an experiment. There's lots of different experiments out there. In our own county, they have a health director that has been experimenting for about 20 years now. against what MD wants them to do, but he just does what he wants to do, which builds his name. I see your hand.
Oftentimes, as you said, control panel will tell you, because we'll see control panels with high alarms and pump alarms and things like that. So most of the time, if I see 3 risers and a couple of breakers, it's like it's a high probably.
It could just be a pump, but you're probably just going to see one riser next to a pump changer in that box. But you can't always ask the county. I don't think anybody's doing sections and specials here, but like we move with county every weekend for information. We hate it. It makes us look dumb. Some stuff you can't easily figure out, and you're trying to figure out as buyer or realtor, thinking you don't know what you're doing because you're trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. It's just a predicament we don't like to get ourselves in.
Are the septic systems online yet?
They're working on it slowly. No, is a short answer. Some counties are getting there. I know Baltimore County, it's as easy as sending an email, and we're going to get records to them now. In Arundel, we apply directly through their online database, even quicker. Carroll County won't answer our requests. They just violate the PIA request. They don't care. I love it. Yes.
Some neighborhoods, newer neighborhoods, see shared septic systems where multiple homes going through. Anything?
No, it's just the one that was there.
About those
Yeah.
on a larger scale.
So I can speak a lot about what are you referring to, a specific county?
I believe it was, where did I see, Howard County.
Howard. Yep. So they don't do as much anymore because there's a lot of headaches with it. Howard was doing a lot. In fact, Amy Hart was a person kind of in charge of these systems. Cattail Creek, do you guys know that?
Yes.
So Cattail Creek, again, I'm an old man. That was like 2008. I don't know. A new development, beautiful, off of 97, Carroll County, Woodbine area. And they were I want to say townhomes. I don't think I've ever been there. Townhomes that fit into one septic tank, for example. They all started backing up in the first year. And they were suing the builder, lawsuits are just flying around everybody. The septic installer, I was working with Fogels at the time, the septic company, and they were pumping the systems out as just this huge headache. I'm not sure if it's actually fully resolved.
I'm not sure
So they won't let them put in more septic systems. They're making them go to holding tanks, I believe. And you can imagine the homeowners are pretty upset. Holding tank systems are where the soil just is not good enough to absorb the soil to the ground. So instead of having an absorption system, this is not a septic system, it's just a holding tank system. We might have 2 or 3 of these septic tanks in a row to add up to 4,000 gallons. In the case of Cattail Creek, they're probably 12,000 gallons. And in a normal home, family of 4, every month you have to pump that out. $300,
So you're talking about the latrine, but just outside of the house. It's just a big.
No, it's all it's all the normal plumbing that you would have, but it's just one in a holding tank that goes nowhere.
But I'm saying, it's just like a big tank.
Big hole
full
in
of
the thing.
sewage.
Yes, so in that case, yes. The latrines a lot of times are dry wells where the water gets absorbed in the ground. Dry wells are the worst case scenario for really anybody. It lowers the value of the property. You gotta spend a pump truck driver, $300 to come out all the time.
I just moved out from Colorado, and in rural Colorado, Clark County, they still have septic lagoons, open ponds.
So that's actually some newer technology. Maryland only has a few of them, maybe 5. Yeah, so he says that they have lagoons in Colorado. What a lagoon is you have a septic tank, and then after the septic tank, the water kind of goes in this big kind of pit that has a bunch of beautiful grasses that are known to pull out the nutrients. And it's one of the best ways to actually put effluent back into the ground is through a lagoon because you have sunlight evaporation, you have the plant nutrients soaked up. It's again, the science is way above me, but there's only a few in Maryland because MD is anyway up to par in Colorado. They're way ahead of the game and stuff like that.
Well, if you're near the water table,
You have to do something like that.
It's also on the corner by Sunshine, in that area.
You're talking Baltimore County? Montgomery County?
Montgomery, Howard,
There's 2
Carroll,
Sunshine.
that corner. There were a lot of shared pump, common tank.
Yes.
Where I have an E1 in the basement with its 500 gallon reserve, and then it would pump to one tank every 3 houses.
And then to the sewer system or to a drain field system?
There's a community
Yeah.
drain field.
So there's lots of different types of these. Sometimes you have where every house may have a tank and then it all gets one community absorption system. Sometimes like in Cattail, there's one tank for 5 homes. You run for the difference there. The problem, in my opinion, with the community systems is that when there is a problem, it's only 2 people's problem and you're spending 30, 40, 50,000, and you have to agree on what you're going to spend. Like it's this conflict made to happen, you know? It's not putting a driveway together and, re-blacktopping it. It's just a really big thing. And, like I was talking to some people earlier, like when a septic does fail, like you can nurture that for a while by pumping it out. Let's make it last longer. There's a whole lot of financial decisions to be made, and it's just cumbersome. And then what happens is one homeowner just refuses to pay because, well, the other guy's probably going to get paid to fix his sewage. And then the county doesn't like it because violation now, not good. That's why I don't like them. Most counties are not installing them. You will still see them in certain areas, where you have trouble. Lots. It's usually not permitted for new lots anymore. The kind of stuff we're talking about Howard and in Roman County or new, but they will make those variances for old homes because they don't want to tear them down. New homes are just not going to let builders.
So, could you, Jim, there's some comments coming from outside there. One of them is he really knows his stuff, but he doesn't seem to be aware of his audience.
Okay.
So if you could repeat questions.
Oh, okay.
Make sure that people who can hear you but can't see everybody and can't hear them.
Understood.
Because this might was pointed at you.
Understood.
They probably can't even hear me right now.
Okay.
I'm talking to him.
Yeah.
Moving on real quick, just kind of wanted to show you what a D-box looks like. I kind of described it by 3 foot by 3 feet. This is probably a little bit smaller. But you have one line coming in, and then this one on the right has an option for 5 lines leaving. Most drain field systems are maybe 2 or 3 lines, so maybe only 2 or 3 of these exits will be used. What this person's doing here with his bare hands is re-leveling a D-box. So we want the D-boxes to be level, right? We want each of these 3 drain fields to get the equal amount of water. That's why we call this a distribution box, equal distribution. But if this box becomes a little bit unlevel, it's going to push all the water to this drain field here. It's going to fail that sooner while these 2 drain fields are dry. So when we find an unlevel D-box, we do want to fix it. It doesn't mean you have to move the D-box and try to level it again. They have these speed levelers, these 4-inch caps you can just stick it over the pipe. It actually puts on the pipe itself, not the concrete. And it has a little 1-inch hole in the 4-inch disc, and you can just kind of rotate it to make sure that the bottom of each hole is equal with all the, it's very easy. They're like $2 parts. We do like to fix stuff like that when we're out on inspection because their cost to repair in terms of materials so cheap, and we're already digging it up and we're there. But it's a pretty simple fix. They do become unlevel often. They can corrode and just kind of cave into absorption systems. So we have these kind of standard systems, which is drain fields and dry wells, or the conventional systems, the ones that might cost, between $6,000 and $9,000. I hate to throw prices out anymore because things are changing so fast, but that's kind of where I would expect them to be. And then you have these alternative systems. We use these alternative systems when the soil is not good enough for drain fields and dry wells, right? So this is going back to this perk test. You guys are familiar with that term, perk test. So before the county lets you put in a system, they're going to make a contractor dig a hole with the backhoe and dump 5 gallons of water in the hole and time it to see how fast the ground takes 1 inch of water. If it takes it between 2 minutes and 30 minutes, you just passed your perk test. If it takes it in 1 minute, that actually means that soil is too good for perking, and then it's not going to filter the dirty stuff, the solids. We're talking about sandy soils, like, again, I'm going to reference Pasadena and areas like that where the perk is too fast, and that's not a good thing. The perk can be too slow, right? We start getting over 30 minutes for a 1-inch perk. Well, geez, now we're getting nervous about putting in these standard drain fields and dry wells. We're going to start thinking about these options: low pressure dosage, a sand mound system, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, drip irrigation. You mentioned the lagoon type of system, which I don't throw up here because there's only a handful around. But there's a handful more that I could talk about, just kind of a waste of everybody's time because we're all never seeing them. If it gets over 1 minute, you kind of failed the perk. For you to get anything in there, you're going to have to be shaking a whole lot of hands. And that's when you have to start thinking about a holding tank if it's over that.
In some houses I've seen a rotating field And every year they're supposed to go out with what looks like a super key and change the field.
So he's asking about alternating drain fields, is kind of what we call them. This is very popular in Fairfax County, Northern Virginia. The name comes from there. It's a bull run valve. So after the D box, the water goes through a bull run valve, and that bull run valve directs the water one way or another way. So the concept that they have with their health departments is what we like to do is put all the water to one of these two drain fields and each year change it. So what we're doing is while all the water's going over here, the left drain field, that right drain field is resting for one full year. And the concept is that should rejuvenate itself to some degree. When a drain field fails, it's because there's a biomat kind of caking around the drywall, the drain field. It's this kind of dead bacteria. And if we have water in that dead bacteria, it's never going to rejuvenate. However, if we're able to draw that drain field and then kind of leave that biomat to breathe air, it'll actually break itself apart again and let the drain field open up. So that's their thinking in Northern Virginia. And I have worked there often in terms of for a 2-year period, full-time, maybe it was 1-year period full-time, but I haven't been there long enough to see which systems last longer. We don't see all that many in Maryland, but you certainly do. And it's very important to know because that has to be related to new homeowners, right?
So somebody wants to know, and the question is, do you always inspect every distribution box on every septic inspection?
No, we don't. A couple problems with inspecting D boxes is there's very few systems have risers over the D boxes. New systems are starting to put them in. I've been barking for this for years, where they have risers. We can just pull up a lid and look in the D box. What it usually takes for us now is a camera with a locator. So we dig up the back end of the septic tank, we put the camera in the back baffle, run it out, because we have no idea where that D box is, right? I mean, way over there, 80 feet that way, 3 feet this way, no idea whatsoever. They're 3 feet by 3 feet. They're reinforced with chicken wire. A concrete septic tank is reinforced with rebar. Our metal detectors pick that up real easy. That chicken wire, not so much. And then we find it, you dig it up 2-3 feet deep. It's usually like a foot deeper than a tank, right? Because we have some fall. And then these guys don't have lids on them, right? These boxes have no handles. You have to dig all around it, lift them up, then it's breaking when you lift it up. It's a big headache for us. Our regulars at MDE, although it's not required, they are really pushing us to observe every component. So we're trying to sell our camera inspection to do that. We at least get to see inside the D box with our camera, which is step one. We really like to dig it up, but these D boxes are not made for inspecting. It really frustrates me because they need inspected. There's no handles on them. There's no easy access to them. They're extremely hard to find. We're just not thinking ahead when they install. So I hope that answers the question.
So there's a question about requirement for risers over the D box.
No requirement. Baltimore County, as of January 1st, changed their county regulations to require D boxes over risers. I'm sorry, risers over D boxes. But no other county, to my knowledge, has that requirement. In fact, there's not a requirement today that any risers have to be on any part of the septic system at all, which again frustrates me because they need to be looked at. However, there is a regulation that septic tanks in Maryland cannot be deeper than 18 inches, in almost all of them. The force of the concrete, right, as it gets deeper, the way of the ground, and they're not made to be deeper than 2 feet, maybe 3 feet, but the put is 18 inches to buffer that. And that would help me. I'm only digging 18 inches instead of 3 feet.
To that point, I know that there's lots of rules about no roads over tanks, no parking lots over tanks. And that's, I failed a couple of tanks.
Yeah, it's funny, you go, to a couple counties over and you start seeing a lot of cars kind of parked, in the grass, and it's right over a tank or a drain field.
In a little while,
the code in Maryland is if you're going to have any type of weight like that over a tank, it's got to be a weight bearing tank.
Yeah, I'll call you back.
Kind of what we reference as inspectors is that, hey, we're not going to tell you where to park your car, but that tank's got to be weight bearing. And then it is dangerous putting all that weight on there. Sooner or later, you're going to find a crack. A crack leads to a bigger crack. There could be a cave in. A weight bearing tank is probably 5 inches thick, where a normal septic tank is 3. Much bigger cost. And then you need a weight bearing riser on top of it. If there's going to be a riser, that's a much bigger cost too. So yes, you should drive over it. The other part of that is we want loose soil over our absorption system. If we compact that soil with the absorption system, that oxygen is no longer getting down to those drain fields. And I was telling you that biomass can kind of eat itself up over time with oxygen. we need that oxygen transfer. We want these drain fields to be as close to grid as possible. More oxygen is closer to grid, and we don't want to compact it. Some guys, I shouldn't say guys, some counties have a really big issue with driving over top. Any question? Both. Tanks have to be weight bearing. Drain fields don't. The bigger damage with drain fields, other than breaking the pipe, is compacting the soil and breaking off the oxygen. And that can really take a lot of years off the life of the system.
Are there any issues with long-term unoccupied houses and things?
So the next question was, are there any issues with long-term unoccupied homes? And the answer is yes, right? We always, you guys too, we want to look at things under normal working conditions, right? We can't when a septic system's vacant. We can try to mimic it, right? We can add a bunch of water and try to figure things out, but it's not going to be the same way. There's really no way around that with a real estate transaction that I've seen. No easy way. One thing that we do, and not every inspector does this, if it's a drain field, we actually probe the drain field, right? These drain fields are compiled of stone, and it both cleans the water and can use a space to store water as it slowly percolates. But this bottom mat that I'm talking about, that's what's going to show on this stone. And if that house has been vacant for a year, that bottom mat might get eaten up a little bit, but it's still going to be there. So when we probe the drain fields, and this happened a lot more when we had all these vacant homes, we don't see it so much anymore. House is vacant for 6 months, we pour rod out, but we're getting just black sludge on each of the 3 drain fields. It's very uncommon for a house that has people in it. So when we see that on a vacant home, we can't pass it. We have no idea it could last 5 years, but we're not comfortable enough because we just don't think it could. It could last sooner than that, and then we have the lawsuit. So we have to look at it differently. We do a much bigger hydraulic load test. So every inspection, we want to run, I'll say 150 gallons of water. There's always a stat to it. If the house has been vacant, we try to double the amount of water, that statistic, to try to compensate for some of that non-living conditions. I'm going to go over here first.
On his question, but in a static state, in a sitting, it doesn't actually harm the system.
No.
It's fine, you just can't evaluate it.
Yeah, so the next question was, if it's vacant, does it harm the system? Absolutely not, it helps the system. So when I see that system that I just described with all that bottom mat, that's telling me when those guys moved out, that thing was failing. But the best thing you can do for a system that's failing is rest it. This is a concept with the blower and valve, and I don't want to bore you, I might be, but these systems, these drywall systems, every county has them with the old 1970, early 80s. Septic tank distribution box, instead of drain fields, we're going to have 2 drywalls sitting out there, which are big pits. If they fail, you can pump one down, have all the water go to the one that hopefully is working a little bit, rest this one for 2 years, and then switch it back. And I've seen people teeter back and forth for a decade doing something like that. For a real estate transaction, we can't recommend that. But yeah, there's great benefits to resting, which goes back to your question about the blower and valve.
One of my septic partners, when he goes into a vacant house, we make sure that his pump truck has got half a tank full of fresh water, because he may have to drop 500 gallons to get the tank back up.
Yes.
To overflow.
Yep. So he wants to make sure he has extra water so he can do a hydraulic load test. The biggest problem, MDE now says anytime that we find that's a leaking tank, and we have to say that it needs fixed. But they only gave that guidance about 8 years ago. And before then, I was passing leaking tanks. I was like, the worst leak in the tank, right at the graphic I mentioned. So not a huge deal. What was I going to say with that? Is there another?
Extra water in the tank.
Yeah, to fill it up to do a proper inspection. Did I see one more hand? I got them all? All 9 questions? This is a standard drain field system. I just like to show you, try to give a visual of this. What this is trying to represent with the arrows is we certainly don't want to put our drain fields in, the middle of a swale. We don't want that groundwater sitting over top of our drain fields. I've seen some poor designs. That is a problem. We want that soil to be right. It doesn't have to be flat. It doesn't have to be on a hill, but we want to make sure it's not concaving in. Just a picture of some stone. They use number 2 size limestone, I believe, something about really big. And the pipe sits on top. That pipe has perforations in the bottom of it, right? So the water that leaves the D-box, first through a hole in the pipe, goes through that, 4, 5, 6 feet of stone, And then in the soil, which filters the water again, right? Septic tank filters it, the stone filters it, and the soil filters it. I mentioned dry wells. Back in the day, they were composed of cinder block, just dry stacked cinder block in a big circle, usually about 8 feet wide, 10 feet deep. Today's world, if we are going to put in a drywall, which is usually only allowed with smaller lots because they don't take up a lot of room, we precast today. Although we don't see the cinder block pavement at all, it's just one of the codes they have. They want to see precast drywalls. Excuse me, then they put the stone around. A board drywall, only in Anne Arundel County. Is anybody in Anne Arundel County? Yeah, I know you do work in Anne Arundel. Anne Arundel, again, is very unusual. They do different systems. They do what's called a board drywall sometimes. So instead of a drain field that's going, say 60 feet long with 8 feet deep of stone, they're going to take that horizontal drain field and make it vertical. So they bring in this truck with an 8-foot awl in the back of it. They drill down 40 feet, 50 feet, whatever it calls for. And then they put this perforated pipe in the middle of that hole connected to the D box, and then fill this huge hole of stone. It works. Comar, the concept is with Comar is we want to keep our drain fields as shallow as possible. This does the opposite. This is putting it real deep. But in Anne Arundel County, he has those areas like Crownsville that has these big cliffs that is probably not a problem. It's just something unique that, the first time you look at one of these, like, what am I looking at? Because it's just unusual to other counties.
Wouldn't that type of system, when you're digging down so deep, wouldn't it just work?
Yeah, and that's probably the concept. I mean, I will tell you this, they last, so he's asking, do those board drywalls, do they last any shorter or longer than other systems? I'm going to tell you on average from what I've seen, they last about just as long as drain fields and drywalls, which is about 30 years. And I don't know how, to be honest with you.
Aren't you risking punching through an aquifer?
They must know what they're doing. So he asked, are we risking punching through an aquifer? I would tell you MDE doesn't like this. If he followed Comar and asked the MDE for permission for this, they would say no, but Rich just stopped asking for permission about 30 years ago. And MD today is actually coming out with different policies to try to get around him, getting around them. It's kind of funny to watch from a private sector perspective. Cesspools, we still run into cesspools every now and again. If you can imagine, I just described a dry well right after a septic tank, after a distribution box, you might have a dry well. What a cesspool is you have no septic tank and no distribution box. It's just 100% household waste going out in the pit in the ground, which is very commonly found in old farmhouses, stuff like that. There's two problems with them if they're still around today. One, they're either working too low, which means they're built over top of what we call fractured bedrock. And I do see it all the time, Westminster, 20 Town, whatever. It's kind of built on top of, fractured bedrock. So in other words, when we put water in there, there's no filtration. It's just going boom, right into the bedrock, right into the aquifer. The danger with that is it's harming the groundwater. It's going to go into somebody's drinking water. For that septic owner, you can't get any better than that. Your system's never going to fail. I've seen drywalls like this. They're just fully designed. They will never fail. They're built into fractured bedrock. But it's bad for the environment. The other side of that is that if the cesspool's full, you can pump it down. It's just going to fill up as soon as water gets back in it. There's no leaching anymore. When they were first installed, let's just say it was installed in 1950 for math's sake, it may take 15 years for that cesspool to fill up, and they wake up in the morning, oh crap, let's call the pump truck driver. He pumps it down, right? Year 1965 after it just failed one time. Well, now it's failing in 1975, 10 years later. Then it fails again 7 years later. Then it fails again 3 years later, then 2 years. So at this point in time, they haven't been put in since the 60s, 50s. If we find them, they're either failing all the time or they're on fractured bedrock. So it just explains to you guys why we fail them. You tell a homeowner it's failing, they look in a cesspool, it's like it's bone dry, how can you fail it? That's the reason. They still don't like that answer.
So, Tim, do you flag the field trench locations?
He's asking if we flag the field trench locations. I hope so. I don't know that all of our inspectors do. I know some of them do, and that should be our policy. I think realtors like it. I think home buyers like it. I'll give you the short answer, yes, but I can't promise you all my guys are following.
Doesn't that have an impact on the location of the well? Because if the distance for a well is from leach field, not from the tank.
If she's asking about, does that affect the distance of the, yeah, it's both actually. They want 100 feet from both the tank and or the leaching field. It used to be different, they keep changing nowadays. It used to be 50 feet from the tank, 75 from the drain field, then it was 75 from, I believe it's 100 feet from both the tank and drain field, different in every state. But yeah, we can do it because we have the cameras and we can locate them. Without that technology, we can't. So because we have those bells and whistles, we like to give the bells and whistles. And sometimes it helps people, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, I think it's a nice little touch. And it does show somebody, right, to look at the map that we give them on paper, and then they can look at the grass and see where it is. Every home buyer seems to have some dream of, okay, place that there, shed there, something. So it just kind of lets them know visually, don't mess with that, right? Cesspools can be pretty beautiful from time to time. This one's built with brick. What we see going in here is a green water. We use dye packets, dye tablets, not packets. We don't do a dye test, right? We don't go out, do a dye test, see if water's backing up, walk away. But we do use dye as a tool in our test. And a lot of times we might see a pipe and like, Jesus, this is coming from the house. We don't know. This is so old. We'll flush dye down the toilet, see that same dye come in the cesspool. That's a scientific proof that this is connected to your home. Because we have ran into that before. We're like, hey, this is really bad. You need to.
It was a huge area, exactly.
Essex. I actually lived in Essex before I moved to Towson, Back River Treatment Plant, Baltimore City. Well, they do run it. They were just kind of lying about, things are going on. It's leaking in the bay. MD took it over, which means MES, Maryland Environmental Services. Our lab actually does wastewater sampling for MES, so we're kind of connected to some of that stuff. But yeah, it's people are only becoming more and more concerned about this. I just want to show you this last picture of a straight pipe that we found, and this is very similar to kind of what you described. They built a bunch of rocks around it. There's no way that we would ever think to find that, but the dye proves it. And then I was like pointing out, it looks like there was a dead snake sitting in the creek. I don't know if you guys can see it in the back. Maybe it's not a snake. I always say it is.
Can you show it again?
Have you ever encountered a situation where you simply couldn't figure out where the waste from the house was going?
Yeah. There's been times in my career where I just couldn't find a septic tank. Now we have the camera, so we can always pull a toilet if there's no better access and find the tank with our camera. So the camera we have a locator, we go on top of the ground outside and find it that way. So that's less and less of a problem. We offer both an evaluation and a camera septic inspection. The evaluation, you may not be able to find enough information. With the camera and septic, we should, unless everything's 3 feet deep or over. We just don't dig that. If you want to hire a backhoe, you can. But now, buyer, you have to fight with sellers to see who's going to pay for it. And I don't want to be in the middle of it. We don't own backhoes, and we have to get somebody else to do that. I want to show this slide. I was referencing the biomap before when we probe a drain field. When you pull that probe up, we want to see this. It's a white, dry stone dust, usually on the tip, right? The contact that our rod has with the stone in the drain field. Number one, we know we found the drain field because you just don't see limestone scattered throughout Maryland, on the surface like that. So we know we hit the drain field. It's dry, right? Because it's got stone dust, and we don't see any water. It's not wet at all. That's great. That's telling us this drain field's going to last for the foreseeable future, which is a pretty long time. Before I get to this extreme example, the example in the middle might be when we pull this rod out, we might see that water's on the bottom foot of this rod, right? That's a 5-foot rod. I hammered 2 feet down before the drain field, and then I got 3 foot in the drain field. 1 foot of that had water. That means that 2 feet of that stone is dry. If you kind of follow my quick math there. And I can just do some math, like, hey, this system's 15 years old. It has 2 feet of liquid depth remaining out of the original 4 or 5, whatever it is, and say, hey, it looks like it's expected to have another 10 years or whatever. It's just some soft science, take some people some guidance. The one on the left is what I was describing with that vacant property, that just thick, heavy biomat. When we see something with this viscosity, that thickness, water is not able to filter through that. It's not able to permeate through. That drain field might have some space to last a little bit of time, but it's going to fail, and it's going to fail pretty soon. Even though it might not be surfacing, we do fail it, and we used to get a lot of kickback from agents. I think over the years, our reputation is kind of getting ahead of us, and we don't get that kickback as much just because we have so much data to back it. And the health departments kind of understand what we're doing now, which 15 years ago, they had no idea what we were doing.
So one of the situations that we warn our clients is septic systems, especially in older homes that didn't used to have municipal sewer, but are now accessible. The municipal sewer is now available to the property line. that the board finds that if your field fails, you may not be allowed to repair it, you'll have to tie in your expense to the municipal system, is that correct?
Yep, so she's saying a lot of times with a septic home that has public utility capabilities, when you pull a permit to replace your failed septic system, they are most likely going to make you hook up to public sewer. And when I say most likely, you could be a quarter mile away and they're going to make you hook up to public sewer. That can change sometimes with the secretary at MDE, but in the recent years, as I've seen very high sewer hookup costs for, think of that farmland, that, just weird lots that are just close but outliers. In most cases, it might be like a $10,000 installation, so it can be cheaper than a septic system in some cases. The good news is, I was mentioning that BRF money for when a septic tank is bad, that BRF will pay for that BAT tank to be installed for free, not just the material, but actually the labor too. We'll do the same for sewer installations from septic tank to sewer. So remember that. It's great advice for anybody that has to tell
I
septic.
think that's only based on you, what you're making on it.
It's part of that BRF vetting is income. If you're rich, and I'm talking rich,
Yeah, they're not paying.
yeah. But you're making $200,000 with your family. You're probably getting money for it. Each county's different.
The issue we've seen in a couple of them is, like you said, outlots. Their septic field fails, they get told they have to hook up to the city. They've got a lot of frontage on a development. And now the development says, you're gonna get hit for 20 years of frontage fees. That can be $30,000 to $40,000.
Yeah, and then they sell the home and the buyer buys that unknowingly 2 years into. I hear a lot of gripes from the realtors about stuff like that. It's a little bit beyond me how they do all those fees, to be honest with you. But they do let you spread that out, which most people take advantage of, and you certainly have to figure out if you're. It can be humongous, right? There's a bunch of different inspections. Maryland regulated us as of January 1st. We have to be licensed septic inspectors. They really didn't change anything though. Like they didn't tell us what we have to do or we don't have to do, or there's very little guidance. We just have to carry a license. But everybody does a different inspection. You still have guys that kind of pump and go, where I call it. You have guys that do a great inspection, pump afterwards. You have companies like us that we don't really pump. Like we're doing inspection and we really usually don't suggest pumping unless there's high solids.
Oh.
The new Maryland form that we have to fill out is horrible, horrible form, but we have to fill it out by law. And then we basically say, refer to Homeland's septic report, refer to Homeland's camera septic addendum because the report's so bad. But in the report, it does have a section for pumping saying, if you feel the system needs to be pumped for whatever reason, note that on the report. So we might be doing more and more of that when we feel a tank could be leaking. It's really hard to tell from the access we have. Right now, we haven't moved in that direction because, again, it's just a bigger cost. And I don't know if it's protecting us or them at this point, but open for consideration. That's grease. Not so easy to see, but that white stuff, if it's not toilet paper, odds are it's grease. This tank is actually backing up. The liquid level is up to the top of the bottom of the top of the tank, if that makes sense. We want to see at least 8 inches, if not 12 inches of airspace between the top of the tank and where the water goes out. So anytime that we can't see where the water goes out, it's overfull. It's really hard to explain to a homeowner what's overfull. They look in a tank, they see water level 12 inches down, like, holy cow, it's full. Well, it's full, but then it overflows, right? Overfull is a problem. That means it's clogging the back line, your absorption system isn't absorbing as fast as it's using. Everybody's digesting their dinner by now, I hope. So this is actually, I believe, a drain field line that just got clogged with biomass, basically. And that can happen sometimes. It's not the stone that backs up. Sometimes it's the pipe itself. Maybe you can jet that out and get it working again, but odds are you probably just have to replace the whole drain field system. But that's where the camera helps too, because that can start matting up. Collapsed tank. I was telling you about those cinder block tanks. I'm not as worried about them leaking as I'm as worried about them caving in. They're made on site. They're not made by precast, engineered, stamped septic tank that I can, put my liability on. If it's made on site and I'm an inspector, that's on me. And thankfully, I don't thank MD very often, but they did tell us, a few years back that we should make these unacceptable. And that was in line with what we were doing anyway. So that was nice. The problem with that is in Montgomery County, they were actually allowing people to put these cinder block tanks in special occasions. And there was one, I believe, was installed in like 2003. We did an inspection like 2012 and we failed it. There was a cinder block tank. It was new, and I mean, the owner was furious, and it is what it is. We're just following the guideline, which I love being able to say, hey, we're just following the rules. Here's a book. Now that's where it says it. It's not our opinion. None of this is our opinion. We're just following the book.
Just a side note, have you ever seen a 22-ton bulldozer disappear? Because it ran over an old tank that nobody knew was there? It's a good reason.
So it's, you know, lawnmower is the example I use for realtors, you know, because some of you see the eye rolls. I'm like, no, I gotta think about this, you know. Quickly, just an example. This was an overflowing septic tank where it was probably backed up and coming out over to clean out and out, right? So this is a house. It looks like it might be a split foyer. The basement's that great. It's not going to back up in the house here. It's going to go to the lowest point and back up over that septic tank in the yard. This is one that it wasn't a real estate transaction. I got it from the health department. A neighbor called in. It was like, I think my neighbor's septic system's backing up, right? And that's the job of the health department, is they're supposed to go out and investigate that. And they had to force this homeowner to repair. I like showing this. So back baffles, right? It's showing you all these T's, that PVC T is what I've been scribing and showing. Sometimes it's not PVC, sometimes it's terracotta or cast iron. In Anne Arundel County, especially other places too, they put this kind of black sheet over top of the baffle, right? This is a line going out and they just kind of bolt 4 spots the sheet over so that those scum levels can't escape right out. It's 18 inches down, it acts just like a baffle. The water has to come out up and over. It's engineered as you would expect. The problem is, if they don't use stainless steel screws to put this into the tank, it falls apart in like 6 months. It's just corrosive, it's a high corrosive, it falls off. It's very hard to see because it just kind of floats there. You know, unless you look right down on top of it, you can't see it. If I'm looking at that through a mirror, you know, through the front of the tank, which is about 6 feet away, I probably can't notice that. So it's really important that we try to dig up the back of the tank whenever possible. Again, access is a huge problem in Maryland, but never possible. I mean, again, it shouldn't happen. It's because some guy wanted to save a few bucks and not use stainless steel screws. But we see it all the time when we have these baffles. This was one in Frederick County. I remember because I handled the angry agent's phone call. This is a manhole riser that was asphalted over, and you can kind of see the circle there, right? And, you know, this agent, I'm sorry we couldn't inspect the system, you know, show her a picture. And I got chewed out because we didn't have the equipment in our truck to somehow take the asphalt off and get access to manhole riser, which of course we do anyway, because then they want us to pay for whatever we destroyed. But times are changing. You know, I don't get those calls. You know, I think the professionalism of real estate, like what they can expect from the inspectors, has helped a lot. Like they still put their problems on us, but back then they used to put all their problems. That's how I. This looks like a good riser, but it's leaking, right? We see that moisture in there. That's because they didn't do a good seal of tar. They usually use tar, sometimes liquid cement or hydraulic cement. It's not a whole lot of water, but that adds up over time, right? Rainwater, when this system's getting old, and now you have a rain, and now you just dumped an extra 150 gallons, 250 gallons of water in your system, you overloaded it years before we need to get overloaded. That is something we note on inspections. You know, there's no reason for that. Whoever installed that, they were just lazy. There's the equipment we have today and the tools they give us, we're not piecing stuff together. Like this is made for a septic tank. You know, there's no reason for that. It's only, you know, 6 inches below grade, but it shouldn't be marked up. This is a view from the front of the tank. We have these selfie sticks and we put our phone in them and we kind of stick them down the front so we can take a picture or video of inside the tank. It looks great. The water level is right here, which is right where the mid-seam is. You guys remember like an hour and 15 minutes ago when I was explaining the mid-seam tank? They're very, very easy to find. The water level is always exactly right at the mid-seam. I believe that's a front baffle because the water's, I'm going to see water coming down in, but we're supposed to have front baffles. We usually do this to check for a back baffle when we can't access it by digging it. We try to use our cameras and other ways to try to just get a visual on it. In this case, we're just able to see the tank is leaking. But you know, you can get a good visual from 8 feet away with the technology we have nowadays. MDE, they really want us to dig up every piece of a septic tank, the front, the middle, the back, the D-box. You know, that means backhoe, that means $1,000 inspection. You know, we're trying to make this much more reasonable until MDE regulates it. And the regulation wasn't very strong. I'm just throwing some numbers out to you. The low pressure dosage system, these are those alternative systems when the soil isn't very permeable, right? The perk rate might be 45 minutes. We can't put in a drain field, we gotta put in something a little bit different. This is a low pressure dosage. The concept here is one, we have a pump after the septic tank, and that's going to be the common thing you see here. There's a pump with all of these. And what that pump does is provides equal distribution. So what we're doing with the pump, we're not using the pump to force the water down through that bad soil. What we're doing is we're using the pump to basically fill up all of these lateral lines as they percolate water through the pipe and into the soil. In a normal drain field, right after that D box, when the water goes to the drain field, it's absorbing that first foot, right? So we're using kind of 1 foot of that at a time, and with poor soils, that's not going to work. We need to use this might be 4,000 square feet right here. You know, the more square footage we can spread that water out, the better the ground's going to take the water. So, you know, again, don't confuse the pump with actually being used as a force to push water down. It's more for the equal distribution. And in these, what we call low pressure dosage systems, they have turnups at the end. These pipes where you can usually see, that's kind of my trigger if I'm inspecting. That's weird. That's a small pipe. It's not 4 inches. What is that? And it's usually a drip irrigation or low pressure dosage. This is so we don't do it in an inspection, but if we did operations and maintenance for this homeowner, we would run that pump, and that pump should be pumping, I believe, 12 inches above the turnup. Like there's a stack, you can kind of check the pump. That's what I'm saying. These systems are about $15,000 because the pump chamber and the pump, right? It really adds on. And in this type of, and any type of alternative system, you have to put in a BAT tank in front of it, BRF, Bay Restoration Fund tank. That's another 15,000, right? 15 plus 15, 30,000. Hopefully the BRF covers that tank portion of it, but they will not cover the absorption side of it. They will only cover the tank side of it. And if you're a builder, they're not going to cover it. Sand mounds, this is kind of one that's most common that most people kind of know about or have seen. We're building sand up, and that's kind of the whole concept here. You know, he mentioned lagoons earlier. I keep mentioning Pasadena and their sandy soils. And the fractured bedrock in the cesspool situations, all the same concept. And CodeMarch says that we want a 4-foot separation at bare minimum between the bottom of our absorption system and the water table or bedrock, because they're both just as bad. They both won't filter water, whether it's water table side or bedrock. And this is why you see most perks done in the wet season, which is generally what depends on the area, but generally between, January and April. Because the counties, when they do a park, when they dig that hole in the ground, they want to see the water table at its highest level. They don't want to do it in July and see the water table way down here and think it's a great property. And some properties really do have a fluctuating water table. So what the sand mound does, right, if we have a water table right here, let's say it's 2 feet down, well, geez, we don't have enough room to put in a septic system. I should say 4 feet down. I'm sorry, let me change that example. We have a water table 4 feet below grade. Well, if we dig anything to put in a septic system, we're within that 4 feet CodeMarch regulation, and we can't put in a septic system. That's for 4-foot separation between the bottom of the absorption system and the top of the water table or bedrock. The sand mound, we're really not digging down at all. We're putting that septic system on top of the ground. And that's really buying us that extra footage or 2 feet or 3 feet that's needed to actually put a septic system in. And that's why you see a sand mound in certain sandy areas like Pasadena or high bedrock areas like Tawnytown. If you went to Tawnytown and didn't see a sand mound, let me know, because I'm not sure I've seen a property without a sand mound. Does that make sense to everybody? I see some good.
How would you recognize that it's a sand mound, not just a hump in the backyard?
Usually pipes sticking out, usually. The newer ones have pipes, the older ones, which they've been put in since the early 80s, unless you have records, you're guessing. Now, experienced septic inspector, it's soil on the outside, but about 3 to 6 inches down, we have a fine sand. So if I'm probing that sand is really easy to feel, and I know it's not natural. So once I get my probe out, I can feel it.
It's pretty obvious. If you're looking at a yard, you know that is not a grade. That was an intentional mound out there.
Here's a final one. Now, to confuse you a little bit more, and I don't have a slide on these, but there's what they call at-grade mounds, which are little humps that are smaller than this and longer, and maybe 2 of them with nothing in the middle, and the humps might be 2 feet off the ground and running like, what is this? It's just another weird system that, unless you've been told, you would never think it's a septic system. And there's a lot of weird stuff like that. So they have at-grade mounds, they have sand mounds. Again, I'm not here to confuse you, but I am here to kind of, I was talking to somebody, know what you don't know, right? That's kind of when I got smart, because I realized what I don't know. In my early 20s, I thought I knew everything. And drip irrigation, I like to mention too, before we wrap up here. Septic tank, pump chamber again, right? Then it's going to kind of a control panel. And this control panel is controlling the zones. And in every drip irrigation, just like we talked about the bull run valve, they're going to have 2 zones. And this is zone 1. In this picture, this is zone 2. When this pump turns on the first time, it's going to pump to zone 1. And again, the pump is to fill up this whole lateral, right? And this drip irrigation, every system I'm talking about is like 4-inch PVC. This drip irrigation is drip tubing, right? You're just kind of laying it up there. You're running hundreds and hundreds of feet. You're going up and back. A drain field usually has 10 feet of separation between a drain field and the other drain field. Drip irrigation, you might have 6 or 8 inches, something like that, very small. This pump is filling up that whole line of drip irrigation, and they're engineering. It might be one every 6 feet has a pinhole that's a certain size, and all engineered crazy like that. But the concept is it should all fill up and slowly drip into the ground. Kind of one of the beautiful things about this, is that the drip irrigation tubing is about 3 inches below grade, right? All these other systems like footage or whatever. So we have a lot of vegetation drinking this water, and it kind of helps get water away from the property instead of just depending on the soil alone, right? We were talking about lagoon, same kind of concept, evaporation, soil absorption, plant absorption. So that's where drip irrigation is good. It's usually more than just the soil, because the soil is bad. And then next time this pump turns on, which is probably going to be the next day, the way they're usually engineered, is going to go to this zone. So this gets to rest for a whole day and give that time for the water to absorb through there. These drip irrigation systems are probably about 30 grand. I would say at least 30 grand plus 15 for the DAT.
And you need to have the yard space with those drip.
Absolutely. And if you have a bunch of trees or coming down, nothing's easy and nothing's fun when you go through this experience. And that kind of goes back to our O&M thing, is we want to have homeowners kind of understand this is coming like 9 months ahead of time versus waking up on a Saturday morning with a failed system. Who do I call? What do I have to do? And it's just, if you don't plan for a purchase this big, you're screwing up. I'm actually done with my class. I'm going to take questions.
Yeah. Are any of these drain fields something that like you shouldn't spend time like letting the kids play in the grass over if it's only a couple inches down?
So he's asking the question, is it safe to play over top of a drain field or absorption system with kids and so forth? The answer is yes, unless it's failing. And be careful. Sometimes, you see these green lines, right? And it's right over top of your drain field. It's like, oh my gosh, my drain fields must be failing because the grasses are pulling up my sewage. It's not happening. When they dig those trenches and then put the stone in and backfill it, they didn't do a great job, and you see these little concaves, and that's enough for more water to kind of fall in that drain field and grow more grass. It's also bad for the drain field because it's not a lot, but that concave is soaking in all that rainwater instead of letting it go away. It soaks it and pushes it right to the drain field.
Might not be ideal, but it's
not harmful, yeah. Unless you see stuff surfacing, it's really not any type of thought.
With this question, can you talk about maybe driving over the yard with trucks or cars or anything that impact?
So next question was, can we drive over, or what should we think about if we have to drive over? Moving trucks, right? I mean, every job we do is probably having a moving truck behind us. It's not like we give out that advice, but no, these guys should know better than to be driving on a yard that could have a septic system. And every now and again we do see damage. I wouldn't say it's humongous. I will say this is probably what they call in the legal term as an attractive nuisance, a sand mound. And you would be surprised how often this turns into a four-wheeler jump. So that's probably where I would see more of the issues is more recreational stuff, putting big trees over a sand mound, something like that. But no, safety-wise, I wouldn't be too worried about that. Any other questions?
Has anyone come across, even in the Deersville Village, where the laundry sink in the basement is draining through the foundation in the backyard.
Oh, yeah.
Out there as
Oh,
well,
yeah.
but
There's still a lot of them there.
So that was kind of, an afterthought, the laundry machines, right? And then they would pipe them in the ground. If they go on top of the ground, our regulators want us to fail. If they go underground, we're allowed to go like this.
Right.
And
But then, it's public sewer.
they still put it in the
Sewer
ground.
line tends to be higher than the floor there.
And it's too much money to pump it up. The environmental effects are the phosphorus, and I believe there's another chemical in there. But if it's going to ground, I think everybody feels pretty minimal.
I don't know whether, I don't know whether it was the thing that the builders did back then, or whether it was Harry Homeowner, but consistently you see those lines going out.
And I guess you have to note it because if it backs up, they're
Yeah,
probably
right, you
they're
do.
calling you, yeah. Well, hey, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great, thank you.